I hope that some of you have come across A Ghost Guide to London, which is a series we did last year for One Stop English, and it was the first time we did a series like that, and we called it cinematic listening. So, it was really something that we wanted to make very exciting. So you have this piece of audio that just sounds brilliant, but so for people listen to it, go, this sounds fantastic, this sounds like the type of audio media that I'm used to listening to in my normal life rather than when I'm at school, but also to have really strong sort of pedagogical teaching aims behind it. And we're really happy with it. We thought it was really good, and so this year we've done A Time to Travel, which is a similar thing but much bigger in scope. So whereas A Ghost Guide was, we had a conversation that happened between our main character, and he would go into a shop and meet someone, and then there'll be an anecdote, and the lesson would be about idioms. We've tried to do something very different in every episode of A Time to Travel. So you may have listened to Lost in the Rainforest, which is the first episode that's out, and we've got our second episode coming out soon, which is all about Shakespeare, called To Be or Not to Be, and we've got a little clip of that we're going to play you later. Now, one of the big things with this series was the level that we wanted to do it at. Now, Luke will talk more about this, but A Ghost Guide to London was upper intermediate, really, but this series is all pre-intermediate, apart from the first episode, which is for elementary. All the rest of the episodes at a pre-intermediate level. So, and also we wanted to make them for younger teens rather than the last series, which is for older teens and adults, perhaps. So when we're putting together the ideas for the new series, there's a few things we wanted. We wanted to have a teenage protagonist, so a teenage hero or heroine, and we came up with this character called Amber Adams, who's a 16-year-old, really cool, sassy teenage girl who also has the ability to time travel, which we came up with because when talking to One Stop English, they wanted something that would tie in with a series of cultural readers they're bringing out. So they've got these fantastic cultural readers that are about the UK, there's also about England, about Brazil, USA, and China. So we had a look through them, and they've all got these fantastic historical characters. There's this brilliant history, it's just sort of this very real history with these great characters. So we thought, okay, we've got this teenage time traveler. She can go back in time. She can meet these characters, have all sorts of adventures, and perhaps learn something along the way. So, we wanted to make it fun, we wanted to make it historically relevant, and we wanted to make it pedagogically relevant. How am I doing, Luke? Am I taking too much time?
You're fine for now. I'm enjoying listening to this, James. Just keep going with whatever you want to keep going with.
Okay, good. So to talk a little bit about writing the scripts. Our inspiration for the series was, time traveling films that you may, Back to the Future, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, and an American series called Quantum Leap that you might have come across, which actually we ripped off totally.
James, be aware that some of the depending on where they're from, may not be aware of. Probably Back to the Future, I guess, was a famous film in the 80s, but maybe Quantum Leap has been translated into a few different languages. Yeah. Maybe I can get Christina is the only person that we have on camera. So Christina, have you heard of Quantum Leap? Put your hand in the air if you've heard of Quantum Leap.
No.
Haven't? No. You see, it was point taken. So James, can you explain? Or shall I explain Quantum Leap?
You explain Quantum Leap.
Quantum Leap was this brilliant. Again, it was probably quite 80s, wasn't it? Or yeah, 80s. Was about the lead character. Was stuck in this kind of time-traveling vortex, and he was going back through time to. I think there was a quote at the beginning of the in the credits at the beginning, which was to put right what once went wrong, and it's about him going into becoming different characters and making sure something that went terribly wrong, making sure it didn't, and so he would go from place to place, and he never knew where he was going to go. and it was very popular, and it's still shown on sort of bad Sky TV channels on repeat a lot. It's still quite popular. But you've probably heard of Back to the Future, Christina. Have you heard of Back to the Future?
And everyone must have heard of Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, or if they haven't, they should find out about it.
Well, yeah. There's quite a few time traveling films that inspired the series. Anyway, I'll let you carry on, James.
Well, the important thing about Quantum Leap is it had this introduction with this voiceover going, and it hopes that every next leap will be the leap home, and all this stuff with all this music. So we kind of wanted to do that, have an introduction with Amber talking to set the scene for each episode. Now, this is also really important for what we wanted to do with the series, because every episode is quite different, and every episode is independent of the other ones. So you can do any of them. You can listen to any of them in any order. There's 10 of them, and it works. And the introduction is a part of the reason that works. You know, here's a time traveling girl. She's got this cool watch. She's going back in time. Then off she goes on an adventure. So to talk a little bit more about actually writing the scripts for it, when you're writing cinematic listening, you're really thinking about the sound effects, the soundscape behind it, what's going on, the music, and what's actually happening in the scene. And once you start thinking along those lines, you start changing what you're writing to fit those sounds. So you go, okay, well, there's two people chatting. There's Amber Adams is chatting with King Arthur or something, and then what will make it more interesting? Let's have a dragon attack them. What will make that sound more interesting? Let's have Merlin the wizard come along and fight the dragon off with magic, and then it sounds great. You've got all this crazy stuff going, but at the center of it, you've got this conversation between two characters, and the language that is in that conversation doesn't change. So any teaching aims you have for that language is still there, but instead of having just two people having perhaps a relatively dull conversation, you've got this storm of sound and sonics happening around that. But it definitely affects how you write the scripts and how you're thinking when you're writing it. Is how can this sound better? What can we do to make this more fun? And I think that I don't come from much of a teaching background like Luke, so I'm kind of on one side going, well, the audio has to sound really cool and it has to sound fantastic to anyone. Like my mum can listen to it and my 8-year-old nephew can listen to it, and they're still both going to really enjoy that. And then Luke's going, well, okay, it's great, it sounds good, but it's got to have very strong teaching aims to it. And so between these sort of two different approaches to it, I think we've come up with something that's really cool, does both things, and doesn't suffer from a compromise, which sometimes things can do. So hopefully it does both those things really well. And I guess one thing we always have to do, we write very long scripts, we record them, and they go, well, this is 15 minutes long, which is far too long for a piece of extended listening. So we end up cutting a lot of stuff out, which is always quite tough because you end up with some really great scenes on the cutting room floor that don't make it. And also when writing the scripts, we try and bring in themes that we're interested in. So contemporary themes, ideas about politics and feminist themes have come into this series. So we've got Abraham Lincoln at the time when he was abolishing slavery. Amber goes back and meets him. We've got Emmeline Pankhurst, who was a suffragette who helped secure women the vote, the political vote, at the start of the last century in the UK. So what's happening here? I'm getting a message of some kind. Anyway,
yeah, well, James, you're back, but I think somebody's just sent a smiley. Okay, it's all fine, James. Carry on. Christina sent that open capture smile.
Okay. Smile.
They're all having a go. Oh, taking photos of you, James.
No, I took a photo of myself.
Oh, you took a photo of yourself?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh yeah, okay. There's all sorts of
be aware. We've got no idea what we're actually. I've got no idea what we're really doing with this Hangout.
Well,
so
what you've done,
let
James,
me shoot on because
you've captured yourself. Oh no, it's okay. You're moving now.
Okay, so let me shoot on because I know that a lot of you are teachers and you want to get onto the more interesting bit of Luke talking about the sort of the teaching side of things.
Not necessarily, James.
We'll find out. Everyone has left the chat, so
Mm.
so we're just moving on briefly to we're recording the scripts. Now we use professional theatre and film actors and TV actors instead of voiceover actors, which is a big difference. Now it's not that there's a problem with voiceover actors. Voiceover actors are fantastic, but when you've got actors who are used to theatre and they're used to that kind of extra dialogue between several people, you tend to get a much better performance out of them. And we have some great times in the studio where we've just got all the actors rolling about on the floor making each other laugh, and then you go from that to recording them, and you get some really fantastic takes. So it's a really different approach to a lot of stuff that we've heard in EFL resources. So yeah, I guess we always, we try and create a fantastic atmosphere in the studio when we're recording. Now, finally, the last thing I want to talk about is the actual production of the audio. So, creating the soundscapes behind the narrative. And by soundscapes, I mean sound effects and music all layered up on top of sounds layered up on top of each other to create these big pieces of audio. And there's little tricks you do. For example, if you know that you're recording a scene and the characters are going to be based on, say, a very busy street in medieval England where you've got musicians and people fighting and horses and carts going past, then you get the actor to talk a bit louder. So they'll say, "I'm here on the street looking at A, B, C, and D," and so when you put that in the context of the sounds, it sounds like they're actually there, and that's something that I'm very big on, is trying to make it sound as real as possible. When I can. Obviously, it's a dragon attacking King Arthur on a castle, then that's only going to sound as real as the imagination. But I try to get it to sound as real as possible. And and with the sound effects, a lot of those sounds come from sort of big archives of sound I've got, but a lot of them we make ourselves. So we have, get all the actors together and the producers. We're all in the studio and we're all kind of clapping and cheering and we're all pretending to have sword fights and going and falling over and taking all these sounds and putting them into the production. So what we're going to do now is play you a short clip from the next episode, the second episode from Time to Travel, which is called To Be or Not to Be. It's about William Shakespeare. Now I'm just going to send you the URL for this.
James, I was going to suggest maybe you could send the URL in the chat. Oh, that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
So if everyone goes,
so that's that, and I'll do a screen share of the website as well. So hopefully you can see that. Does that screen share come up?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
But it's gone.
So if you
now.
Okay, well, if you get to that screen, just give you another 20 seconds or so. So you've typed it in. And so if you're ready, then press play now. I'll press play as well, so I know when it's finished. Okay, 3, 2, 1, go for it.
Hi, I'm Amber Adams. Now keep this to yourself, but I've got something amazing to show you. Okay, it's a watch, but it's not just any old watch. Listen to what happens when I touch it. I can use it to travel through time to anywhere I want to go. So, what do you reckon? Are you ready to come on an adventure?
William Shakespeare is widely regarded as the greatest writer in the English language. Not that much is known about the man himself, but there are several things. Feeling sleepy? Are you confused, Miss Adams?
No, sir. I wasn't asleep. Please don't be angry. I was thinking about Shakespeare.
Do you expect me to believe that?
Honestly, I'm embarrassed now. I love Shakespeare.
Then perhaps you might like to tell the whole class what I just said. What is considered to be Shakespeare's favourite line from his play, Hamlet? There's no point in looking at your watch, Amber. Class doesn't end for...
Roll up, roll up! Auditions today for William Shakespeare's new play, Romeo and Juliet. Male actors only. Roll up, roll up!
Perfect. That's where I'll find him. The auditions at the theatre.
So hi everybody. I hope everyone's managed to listen to that. I'll just wait sort of 5 seconds just in case I was a bit early. I actually have a question for James. What's the song that you put in there? Can good enough for the captains. What was that? I can't hear you actually. I think you're muted. It's good to know if I can't hear you. I think somebody has muted you. Yeah, I
think
like
that's
that.
because I think the sound was coming back through the microphone and looping round, so people are probably hearing an echo.
Okay.
Anyway, hopefully that website page will be up for the rest of the day. Then we're going to take it down, but before the episode comes out, the start of next month.
Yeah, I think it's. I think the day. I think it's the. Go on, sorry, James.
I would say that song was "The Drunken Sailor," which is a sort of famous old English shanty song. So it's what are we going to do with the drunken sailor early in the morning, and about chucking him in the brigs because he's drunk.
Is that as early as Elizabethan era?
Yeah, it's really old. Yeah.
Is it really old?
Yes,
brilliant.
It is.
I hadn't noticed that so much before. There are obviously I'm the teacher rather than the audio producer. So there are lots of elements to the cinematics that I firstly don't understand, and secondly don't always pick up on in first listening. So although people seem to assume I'm very technical, I'm not that technical actually. I leave that up to James, and as you know, we're brothers. It's often the case with siblings that one person becomes very practical and technical, and the other person doesn't. And I was the one that wasn't technical and practical, but hopefully with other skills, such as being able to stand in front of teenagers and hopefully teach them something, or even primary school children, which I've done recently as well, which is even more of a task. So what's been really nice about this series is I've been able to test the lessons as we've written them, because I had a period teaching in a primary school, as I mentioned before, and now I'm teaching again in an EFL school. And over the summer, I had predominantly teenagers, so it was kind of what we've marketed the course at. Although, if you are a teacher of adults here, I think these lessons are more than suitable for adults as well.
Just to interrupt you, I'd say there are a couple of episodes in particular, like the suffragette one about Emmeline Pankhurst, perhaps the Lincoln one as well, are all quite sort of adult-related material. So those ones can work well.
I think the first episode, Lost in the Rainforest, which I hope you've had a chance to listen to or may have even taught, is certainly by its very nature about the rainforest and animals, and is sort of for elementary level students, or suitable for pre-int as well, or even as far as intermediate. But the very nature of that episode suggests it's for a slightly younger audience. But certainly for the rest of the series, I think it's suitable for teenagers up to any age really. So I've been able to try out the materials on students, and I've been trying out this idea of cinematic audio on. It sounds like they're guinea pigs, so they're not guinea pigs, but I've been trying out this idea for years really. Me and James, the first thing that we ever created was using cinematic audio, and it was using cinematic audio in audio tours around London, and those audio tours at pre-intermediate level were about half an hour long. And it's just this kind of strange, not even strange idea, this kind of fear that really students can't listen, of that level, students can't listen to a passage that long. And certainly when they were out on tour, I realized that they could, because they had various different stimulus that would keep them engaged and focused. But kind of recreating that into the classroom, you can't get. I mean, you could, but it would be very intense to sit a student down and get them to listen to a listening passage for 30 minutes. You can get a student to listen to a listening passage for much longer than they're used to, and that's kind of the impact of cinematics, I think. And when I mean cinematics, I mean all the kind of sound design for the course. And I think the idea with this course, or this series, being pre-intermediate level, was it's quite a motivating experience for a pre-intermediate learner to be able to listen for 7 minutes and quite comfortably and enjoy the process. A lot of the time we're playing passages and practicing sub-skills, and listening can be quite tough, quite forensic, and quite unenjoyable a lot of the time. You're almost setting yourself up as a teacher to say, right, I'm going to press play and you're going to find this really difficult, and you've got to kind of write some notes as we're listening and answer these comprehension questions, and you've got to get it right. And it sort of puts a bit of pressure on. I speak to a lot of learners, and I know how difficult listening is. So this idea of cinematic audio is really to try and make listening, to take that pressure off, and to encourage listening for enjoyment, which is kind of one of the key principles of what we do. In the same way that you encourage students to go and read and enjoy reading and use their imaginations, and those that like reading tend to pick up sort of English in a kind of passive way. They're not going out and forensically trying to search for language. They're enjoying the language, and so we always say that the teenagers that are getting good at English are the ones that are reading outside of class. So this idea of enjoyment is this idea that I think EFL, from my experience, is very much focused on participation the whole time. Communicative approaches to learning where students are put into pairs and groups, and it's all about what they can get out, what language they get out of a lesson. But I think cinematic listening is a much more passive experience, and I think one thing I've noticed is I say to students, if I play them a passage that's 8 minutes long, at the end of the listening I say, how long did you think that was? How long did you think you were listening for? And you get varied responses. Of course, there's going to be a sort of 45-year-old Italian student in my last class was it like 15 minutes? But the other students was it 2 or 3 minutes? They were very surprised. Excuse me, I get very thirsty when I'm talking. They were very surprised to learn that the passage was 8 minutes long, and I think that's what I really like about it. There's this kind of unconscious learning happening. Something's happening, they're not even that aware of it. And I think if students can be learning English and not really conscious of it, that's kind of closer to how we learn our native languages anyway. So that's an important part. The next thing that we do in all of our lessons, or we did in our previous series, A Ghost Guide to London, and we're doing in this series, is comprehension questions afterwards. So it's reconstructing. It's a reconstruction process where students are trying to remember, trying to see what they can remember, and it's quite amazing actually. If you put students into groups, even pairs, or even individually on their own, it's quite amazing what they do remember. And I think the nature of the sound design and the enjoyment involved in listening is they're not even conscious of what they're going to remember, if that makes sense. So when they do the questions afterwards, they're kind of surprised. I've noticed a surprise of like, oh yeah, I do remember all of this detail from an 8-minute passage with quite a lot of content in it. And I think that's a wonderful result. The other thing that I've noticed with students recently, and I'm really talking about this series because I've been teaching, and I'm currently teaching at the moment in the school in London, is that students have asked me at the end if they can listen to if they can find it, if they could go to the website themselves, and I explained that One Stop English is a teacher resource site, and you need to have a subscription, and some of the episodes are free, and they're like, oh, what's the subscription? And I say, oh, it's roughly this amount of money, and they're like, well, I don't want to subscribe, and I'm like, well, and I have a membership, and so I don't want to give them my email and password and say go and use what you want, because that would defeat the point. I'm a one-stop English author. I don't want people just sharing their subscriptions. But I do say to them that there are some episodes free, and they like listening afterwards. And I think as a teacher, that's something you can do afterwards. You can do the whole lesson, and at the end you can say to your students, does anyone want to listen to this again? And I think that's the really enjoyable part. I think you've given them a listening experience that they want to have again, and when they listen to it again, they are purely listening for enjoyment. They've already had the language, they've already know the story, and they can enjoy it again. It's a bit like when you watch your own a film again, or a TV show, or a comedy that you've watched before. You know the plot, you know the story, but you just really want to watch it again. So having students ask me to listen to it again outside of class is another really positive result. And the other thing is entertainment. And when I first became a teacher, I remember being told by a line manager that he came into one of my classes to observe me, and he said, oh, it's great, your class are really chatty, it's really loud, your class. He said that's a sign of a good lesson, is a loud class. And so I was like, yeah, great, but I wasn't quite sure why the class was loud. I wasn't quite sure exactly what I was doing. But everyone was laughing, and people were having a good time, and I thought that was the right thing. And then I remember gaining more experience as a teacher, and then when I did my Delta, and the training involved was quite forensic and quite serious, and you have to have certain objectives and aims, and 9 pieces of vocabulary, and you've got to make sure you go through meaning, form, and pronunciation, and all this kind of this regimented process of how to teach a good lesson. I started thinking, a loud class is no longer a good class. A loud class is they're just having fun. It's not, the aims are not clear. But I've kind of gone back and thought, actually, this kind of Krashen's effective filter of making students, taking that away and making students feel totally relaxed, and that entertainment, which you can't really, it's hard to achieve with listening material, is what has a really, I think. And so you have an enthralled audience and a happy audience, and I think that is a beautiful environment for learning, and something perhaps we take for granted as we become more experienced as teachers. We get a bit more serious about what we're teaching them, but you can still have those serious aims, you can still have the entertainment and the fun. So I think we've achieved that. Well, we've certainly aimed to achieve that. So there are definite learning objectives, but it's also a lot of fun, and a lot of fun should not be underestimated.
Can I just chip in there, Luke? So I think that's that's been absolutely key to it from the start of all of this, which was if you capture the students' attention really early on in the lesson, and there's something that they like the sound of, then you've got their attention, you've got their focus, and then you can teach them whatever you want, more or less, and hopefully they'll be listening. And we realised this really early on, because the very first thing we did with these audio tours that Luke mentioned, and they've got a little introduction to them, which basically says, you've got headphones in, don't get run over. But it does it in a kind of a funny way, whereas you've got these 3D sounds, because you're wearing headphones, and you've got a cyclist cycles past your right ear and then pretends to crash and fall into the river. So it's got a bit of comedy in there. But what we saw when we were testing it with students finding it hilariously funny. Straight away, you've got their attention, and then they're like, okay, what's going to happen now? And they're focused, and that's just been ongoing for everything we've done. And it's something I see clearly, because I'm not the educator. I just see the reaction of the students, and if they react well, then that means I've done my job well, I think.
Yeah, And I think with this series, slightly different to the previous one, A Ghost Guide to London, is that we're trying to actually make the teaching notes, if you like, and the worksheets less busy, less forensic, less serious, to encourage that idea. And there's a lot of, in the teaching notes for this series as well, as the episodes come out, there's a lot of notes to the teachers. I think teaching notes are quite important, and note and aims of why we're doing this, and I think that's quite clear in the lesson notes. I think that's about my mind's gone. That's about as far as I got. That's about as far as I got, James. Is there anything else you want to say before we start? Hopefully, getting lots of wonderful questions from the audience. Is there anything you want to add, James?
No. Has everyone got any questions? I guess.
So yeah, questions. Most people don't have cameras, so or can't be heard. So questions in the chat box. Feel free to ask us. Or Christina, you may have a question that you might. I don't know if we can able to hear you. Currently can't hear you. I don't know if Henry can change that. Don't feel too much pressure. Again, it's I don't want you to feel like you're doing a traditional listening task and you're an EFL student and you must ask a question. If you don't have any questions, that's equally fine. Maybe that's a sign that we've covered all bases, perhaps. It was interesting to hear about your experience of teaching it. Thank you, David. David, can you carry that on and turn that into a question? Any recommendations? Any more recommendations? Any more recommendations for teaching it? Well, certainly the points I've already made. Reading the teacher's notes, which I hope are quite self-explanatory and not too esoteric or complicated. Asking students if they want to listen to it again. Other recommendations. Yeah, don't be afraid. Go on.
Yeah, and I said they're also, because they're all, some of them more loosely than others, but are linked in with his cultural readers, and all of them have famous historical characters in. So there's a whole load of extra work you can do based around the actual characters and the history in it, if you wanted.
A lot of those are put in. There are extension activities which are not in the worksheet. So, I mean, I was always a teacher, or have always been a teacher, to sometimes sort of discard the teacher notes because I find them too long sometimes, and I just go straight to the worksheet and I try and figure out what the worksheet's doing, and I just kind of print out worksheets. Also, it saves on printing. But in the teacher's notes, there's extension activities a bit like that, and I'm also a bit of a spoiler here, but I'm also there's also going to be a really nice web quest about William Shakespeare that's going to be coming out, that's going to be related to this episode as well. So there's, finding it, there's the subject matter, there's a vast range of things that you can bring into it because of the subject matter. Christina said students want to listen, they do anything but reading. Where are you from, Christina? Where are your students from? I can't hear you, unfortunately. I heard you just... So if you carry on, if you can write into the chat, that would be great. And I wonder if your students are teenagers. Students want to listen, they do anything but reading. Well, that's a good thing in terms of this series, then. I guess...
Phone is muted. Can you hear me
I
now?
can hear you. Yes,
Okay,
I
it
can
was
hear you.
muted.
Hi, it's nice to hear your voice.
Okay, I'm from
Hi.
Romania. Yes, my
From
students
Romania.
are teenagers.
Yeah.
They really want to listen because unfortunately here in Romania our system mainly teachers don't use listening, don't use ICT, and they are very pleased when mostly young teachers do go to the classroom with songs, movies, whatever.
Mm.
Yes.
Well, I think that's great. I think one of the problems with listening material, the sort of traditional CD or even tapes, once upon a time, all the schools I've worked in as a teacher, they've always got lost, first of all, and also it's really hard to find. You've got to flick through and find the track, and also the problem with listening material not being particularly exciting. A lot of
I
it. So
spend
you
a lot
tend
of time on the internet finding the right song, the right recording for my classes. I was really thinking about that Shakespeare material. I teach 9th graders this year, 4 classes, and that's really helpful.
Are you teaching Shakespeare, Christine? Did you say?
I'm going to this year, yes. I'm going to teach Shakespeare, and I found last year I found some really interesting movies on YouTube. So I use anything I find.
Anything you can find, yeah. But I think that, again, that's an interesting point as well. So you're obliged to go out there and find it, which is fine. But also when it would be nice if you didn't have to, trawl through the internet to find things as well. So that's what me and James are very interested in, is creating a kind of portfolio, a sort of a bank of listening materials, which is of that kind of level. But yeah, but also there's nothing beats finding a decent